aware of this and decided that they didn't want to take it seriously. I'm not engaged in conspiracy theorizing about any of this, but there is a huge scandal, I think, that is going to continue to unfold in Israel. And many Israelis are asking that question. Look, Israel is a nuclear power, armed, funded, supported, bankrolled, backed by the United States of America. It has promoted an image of itself around the world that it can reach its enemies wherever they are and assassinate them and take them out. And that all crumbled on October 7th. We had guys that are making sniper rifles and buying equipment that you can get on Amazon, and they're taking out surveillance towers with their low-end quality drones and using paragliders to go in, or doing amphibious assault landings. The idea that a modern military that is bankrolled, armed, and funded by the United States was not able to repel that force raises a lot of questions that I think Israeli society is going to be grappling with for quite some time.
In your piece, you quote Rashid Khalidi, the renowned Columbia University professor, now retired, author of the 100 Years' War on Palestine, widely viewed as the leading U.S. historian of Palestine. He talked about the massive civilian death toll in Gaza. He said to you, quote, "These deaths should be on the conscience of the Israeli leaders who decided to kill all these people, but they also, to some extent, should be on the consciences of people who organized the October 7th operation. They should have known and had to have known that Israel would inflict devastating revenge, not just on them, but mainly on the civilian population." Do you credit them for this? The end result may be the permanent occupation, immiseration, and perhaps even expulsion of the population of Gaza, in which case I don't think anybody would want to credit whoever organized this operation. Your response, Jeremy?
People.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was trying to do in this reporting was to explore the breadth of perspectives on this question of, on the one hand, I don't think that anybody who has a reasonable grasp of the history would deny that the Palestinian people have a right to resist, and that Israel and the international community have sent a message to Palestinians that even nonviolent resistance is going to be met with force, as happened in 2018 and 2019 in the nonviolent demonstrations at the barriers of Gaza, where Israeli snipers had a competition to see how many unarmed protesters they could shoot in the knee. So I don't think that there can really be any reasonable debate about whether or not the Palestinians have a right to resist. This is a tactical question. Should Hamas have been able to predict that the response from Israel was going to be far beyond any of the other recent bombing campaigns? And I heard different answers from people within Hamas. Some said, look, we knew that it was going to be a heavy response. We knew that a lot of people were going to die. This is the nature of how Israel responds to our legitimate resistance. But we did not imagine that it was going to be more than kind of what happened in 2014 or 2021, but maybe on some steroids. But there were other officials that said no one within Hamas predicted that it was going to be this scale of a genocidal war. So there isn't necessarily a party line on this. I got the sense that this is a question also that Hamas itself is debating, because there are going to be people that are going to confront them with these questions within Gaza itself. There's an interesting dynamic that has played out, though, where you see Hamas's popularity and also Islamic Jihad, the idea of armed resistance against Israel. In polls, it indicates that beyond Gaza, in other parts of Palestine and in the diaspora, that support for armed insurgency and attacks against Israel has gone up. Hamas's political standing has certainly gone up in both the West Bank and in Gaza, but whether that's going to translate into political power is a different issue. Susan Abu Hawa, who is a famous Palestinian novelist and activist who's been twice to Gaza, she's also been on Democracy Now!, also was talking about this, and she said, yeah, when you talk to people on the ground in Gaza, certainly some of them are saying very critical things about Hamas, but everyone knows who's bombing them. And I think in a way this discussion becomes a trap of sorts, because the fact is that the United States has enthusiastically backed and armed and bankrolled a genocide for 9 straight months. Joe Biden, his career has been marked by unapologetic defense of Israel at its most extreme. I think that what is clear right now is that this is the moment when the world needs to address in a definitive way the demands by Palestinians for decades to have an independent, unified Palestinian state, because the Israeli negotiator Gershon Baskin told me also, this has to be the last war. Israel is not going to survive if this goes on. So even, from his perspective, he wants this to be the end of it. There's big questions about, Biden pushing this notion of a two-state solution. I've heard different things from Hamas individuals. Hamas does not want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution, a unified Palestine. But their official position is that if it's the democratic will of the Palestinian people, they will accept a two-state arrangement along the 1967 border lines. But they also point out, tell me where the borders of the current state of Israel even are, because of all of the illegal annexations, the expansion, the land grabs, the expulsion of Palestinians from land that the whole world recognizes as Palestinian territory. This is not just rhetoric from Hamas. This is basic facts that they're relaying.
You mentioned Gershon Baskin, one of the Israeli negotiators who helped to negotiate the release of Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier, for 1,000 Palestinians who were imprisoned. If you can talk about his perspective on this, he's been behind the scenes since October 7th, negotiating around hostage issues. And then I'd like you to talk about who exactly Yahya Sinwar is.
Yeah, Gershon Baskin, is a well-known Israeli peace activist who Hamas has been willing to deal with him, and he did play a central role in this massive exchange of Palestinians who were in prison for Gilad Shalit in 2011. And as I mentioned earlier, this is how Yahya Sinwar won his freedom. Gershon Baskin also said, look, on day 4 after October 7th, that he was in touch with Hamas negotiators. And what he said, which Hamas had been telling me, but Gershon Baskin confirmed it, that many civilians who were taken inside of Israel were not, in fact, taken by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but by other people who came in second and third waves from Gaza. These are people that have been, imprisoned in what they view as a concentration camp for their entire lives. For multi-generational reality has been living in this prison. And so people, pour in, and they're taking hostages back to Gaza, including children and the elderly, and sick people. And my understanding is that Hamas was not prepared for this, and they didn't imagine that so many people were going to be taken back. And so on day 4, October 11th, Gershon Baskin and others were talking to Hamas, and Hamas was saying, we want to hand these people back to you, immediately. And they were asking for very little in return for it. They wanted them off their hands. Also, they were having to run around and track down all of these people. And Baskin tried to negotiate that. The Israelis said no. Yahya Sinwar, the head of Gaza, then some weeks later said he wanted to end the war by making a comprehensive deal for the release of every single person that had been taken back to Gaza as a prisoner or a captive or a hostage in return for emptying the prisons of Palestinians, and the Israeli government rejected it. Now, Israel will have its own perspective on that, and say, oh, this isn't what Hamas would really mean, or they're not sincere. But this is just the factual timeline based on Hamas's perspective that's been confirmed by Gershon Baskin. On the issue of Yahya Sinwar, this was a guy who, soon after Hamas was formed in 1987, and he was, an original member of Hamas, which was in effect an outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. Sinwar was arrested on allegations that he was essentially an internal hitman for Hamas, murdering collaborators with the Israelis. And Israel also was accusing him of plotting to murder Israeli soldiers, but they snatched him, they put him on trial, and he was sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison on allegations that he had murdered 4 Palestinians that had collaborated with Israel. And he spent nearly 23 years in prison. And while in prison, he became fluent in Hebrew. And actually, he wrote a number of books inside of prison himself, including a novel that was semi-autobiographical. But also, he translated by hand the memoirs of some heads of Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence agency, from Hebrew into Arabic. He spent 2 decades studying Israeli society, Israeli culture, the history of the Mossad, the history of Shin Bet. And then he's released back into Gaza in 2011, and then eventually consolidates his authority. And he has militantly insisted for years, since he won his freedom, that he views it as a moral issue to release the rest of the Palestinian prisoners. And that is something that he has really emphasized as a central goal of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. And he himself was one of those prisoners and was in the negotiating committees in multiple rounds of negotiation from prison with the Israelis. So he understands very, very well the mentality of his adversaries in this war. And I would say that they also understand him very well also, because intelligence operatives spent a lot of time debriefing Yahya Sinwar or trying to play mental chess with him over those 22, 23 years in prison.
Jeremy, this is Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar back in 2021 speaking to Vice News, comparing the Palestinian struggle to the police murder of George Floyd. But this was 2021. This is before October 7th.
I want to take this opportunity to remember the racist murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was killed as a result of a racist ideology held by some people. The same type of racism that killed George Floyd is being used by Israel against the Palestinians in Jerusalem, the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, and in the West Bank, and by the burning of our children, and against the Gaza Strip, through siege, murder, and starvation.
That is Yahya Sinwar speaking back in 2021 to
right.
Vice News. Your final comment on this, Jeremy, and then we want to talk about, as we talk about news organizations, your new news organization.
Because it's the same group of people doing the same thing. Ain't no different. What's the difference between them and what's going on and what took place on even the black people historically here in the what you call the United Snakes of America? It's the same thing. The invasion of the land and the brutality of their hand. What's the difference?
They say is revolutionary violence. Many of the Hamas officials I talked to are veterinarians or doctors, deeply educated people. So, Sinwar is clever, and he is trying to appeal to an American population in the same sense that some of the announced objectives of the October 7th attacks were probably not the most important or central objectives to Hamas, but they want to emphasize those as a message to the broader Palestinian population in the world, or to Arab populations to hold their own governments accountable for doing, in the eyes of Hamas, nothing to defend the Palestinian people. Regarding Drop Site News, it's not any secret that the world that we live in right now has a lot of dark things going on. We urgently need shows like Democracy Now!, institutions of investigative journalism, and what Ryan and I are trying to do is build a lean, sustainable, reader-supported news organization that's going to take big swings at powerful people, that's going to work with networks of independent journalists on the ground in countries around the world and inside of the United States, and to operate with no fear or favor of those in power, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. Our pledge is to, as I know yours is, Amy, and has been for a long time as a journalist, is to be accountable to the readers, the viewers, and the listeners. And
that's right.
I just want to say on a personal level, I said this in my introductory essay for Drop Site News. I'm looking forward to returning to why I got into journalism, and Democracy Now! Gave me that opportunity. I'll never forget when you let me beg my way into cutting reel-to-reel tape on the old-fashioned analog reels, and you taught me about the temerity to ask tough questions and to never back down.
And finally, Jeremy, why the name Drop Site?
Right up the middle.
Well, a drop site is a term of espionage, where it's a place where spies can leave a secret for one another. It's an agreed upon location. It also is a place where you can drop supplies behind enemy lines, to resupply your forces.
5 seconds.
It's also a place where you can drop documents. So we're looking forward to working also with whistleblowers.
Jeremy Scahill, co-founder of the new investigative journalism organization Drop Site News. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining.